Hello, this is for
Hello.
Empowered Family. This is my friend Marcy. Her and I went to the same ward at one point, and we were both mamas with our hair on fire with the gospel. And we lived it fully, and we were just part of the ward structure where we're always showing up, and we showed up big as we could. And then we also had our collapse about the same time too. And so we've kind of watched each other and communicated and been on hikes and done all kinds of things during our transition. And I love Marcy's insight on mixed faith marriage. I don't feel like qualified to really communicate on this because my ex-husband and I, we kind of deconstructed at the same time. And so I always like to get the insight of somebody who had that dissonance in the relationship, to give us more insight and more tips and tools. And specifically, today we're going to be talking about communication. So first up, I wanted to introduce you to Marcy. Marcy, can you just share a little bit about your story and why you're so passionate about helping people who are in mixed faith marriage and people in transition out of the LDS religion in general?
Yes, thanks, Wendy. Hello, everyone. I am on vacation right now. My grandchildren are in the background, so I apologize if this is a little, not my normal. I don't have my laptop here. It's all good. But my story is long and complicated, but we're going to just tune right into about 6 years ago. My husband and I were both excommunicated for our doubts. So we left at the same time, but let me back up a little bit, because he started his faith journey 2 or 3 years before I did. And let's just get down to what happened to me is I went to total fear mode. Okay. So he was very much into the doctrine. He was a scriptorian, very much like Wendi. I remember this about Wendi. I also was very much a student of the scriptures, very devout, but not so much into the doctrine. This man was, Isaiah, he could quote Isaiah. He was attending lectures by Abraham Gileadi and, the apologists of the church and everything. So the difficulty with our situation is that we had been married at this point for 28 years. So he was very concerned about even discussing anything with me. So he didn't. He went through almost his whole deconstruction before really communicating anything to me. So by the time he had decided and finally came to me with some of his concerns, I was like, whoa. It was very scary for me. I had never thought that I would even be considering leaving the faith, ending my marriage, but these were all real concerns for me. And I'm ashamed to say that was my first reaction, is that, wow, I'm going to have to navigate single life because I'm staying in the church, that was just my first reaction. I want to say I'm very ashamed of that. But I will say that over time, when I, just really kind of went within and decided, okay, is it worth looking into this, giving this the benefit of the doubt? Why, yes, it is. Instead of just saying goodbye to my marriage, I'm really glad I did that. And as I got really, utilizing my critical thinking skills, obviously, little by little, I came to my own truth. Without his help, he had no idea that I was going through my own journey at the time. And about a year later, we were on pretty much the same page, knowing that the church was not the church leadership, or it was not what it had proposed to be. And we both were excommunicated. Now, we are also the parents of 7 children. At the time of our excommunication, we had 3 children married and a 4th away at BYU, Idaho. So we also had 3 children at home. So a lot of complications in that. But what brings me to this right now is the fact that I had my own transition at a different time as my spouse. And I now have, with 4 married kids now, 2 of which are in mixed faith marriages, it is always on the top of my consciousness. Especially, I'm actually visiting right now a home that is a mixed faith marriage. And so, yes, it's very much a part of my life. I see it firsthand. I know the suffering. I know the pain. And it is why I'm in this space. I I'm here to help relieve the suffering. I am here to bring validity to the concerns of others, and really just to help navigate the things that I feel are so important. And partnership, marriage, relationships are more important than religion. So this is why I'm here talking about this.
Perfect. And what I love is when we can tell stories just from regular households. It's not like we're superstars.
Exactly.
We just talk about this because these are not isolated experiences that happen to people in the limelight. This is what happens in the underbelly of the religion all the time, all the time. It's going on today. And just today, some spouse is going to reveal to the other one that they've lost their testimony. It's happening all the time. And the more that we can come up with strategies on how to navigate through this by doing it poorly, and by doing something right, and by admitting we should have, if we could look in retrospect and do it differently, how we would do that differently. And so what I really find value in what you're going to communicate is that I know you're going to just be totally frank and honest with us and what worked and what didn't work. And so we kind of narrowed down to three things about communication when you're going through the faith transition itself. And we have the when, what, and the why, but you kind of already touched a little bit on the when. I would love you to expound on that. But what would you have done differently about the when you decided to have the conversation?
Well, I'll tell you, there were a lot of conversations, and typically they were super high emotional times for us. We didn't have the coaching. We didn't have a community of people that had left the church that we could model our experience after. This is why I'm here. That's why Wendy's here. But to have it be at a time when you feel safe. So emotions are going to have to be at a little calmer time, not when you've been having a disagreement about something or when you've been triggered. Maybe you write down those things and decide, we need to talk about this. A lot of times it would happen for us over dinner, when we're out, just the two of us, so that we could communicate in a way that it could be received and expressed in a safe manner. Does that help?
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is like when you're feeling safe, that your emotions aren't high. I have this saying that say, when emotions are high, intelligence is low.
Exactly.
Step back and recognize your feelings and your emotions, and to be conscious and not random about when you're going to have those conversations, because you know that they're very emotionally charged and something could erupt to where you end up in a big conversation because, like you mentioned, you're in a state of fear.
Exactly.
So what were some of the things that you were afraid of? Like when you heard your husband talk about his deconstruction and things that he didn't believe in anymore, and you're kind of in this state of shock, what was that you were afraid of?
So I loved our little life. It was working out perfectly for my awake self, or asleep self, I should say. So, I'm just thinking about, oh, he wants to sin. Oh, he wants to go drink coffee and alcohol. And this is all the reasons. And these were very valid concerns of mine, which is so funny because I was always like, gosh, if I ever left the church, coffee would be number one. But I was very fearful of that. So I wanted to know, are you going to be doing all these things? Are you all of a sudden going to start cheating on me? Do you want to have sex with other women? Do you want to go to bars? Do you want to have, it was so stupid, you guys, the fears that I had after 28 years of marriage. Okay. I am, again, ashamed of how I reacted to some of this, but I needed to be reassured. So what not to do? Do not, and we didn't talk about what we're going to talk about, what not to do, but do not start coming off with the facts and this is what you need to do. Your spouse, if they're going to also get interested in looking at the doctrine, are going to do it when they want to, if it feels when they're ready. Okay. Your experience is different than their experience. So please do not become I'm going to load you with all these facts, because guess what? None of us, and Wendy's covered this a million times, we did not join the church because of facts. We joined because of emotion. Your spouse is not going to leave because of facts. They are going to leave because of emotion, or because it feels better to leave. So, sorry, reining it back in. We are talking about how
Well, we're talking about the when part.
When, sorry, the when, yes, the
What-
when.
what
And
was the point?
I went off on a tangent on what not to do.
So
But what you asked what I was afraid of, and those are really valid things. Like, do you have a moral compass? Are you still going to be a good person? Are you, there's all these just fears, because you think when you hear all the things, when people leave the church, they're going to be unhappy and they're going to do this. And the church is what controls all that. And guess what? That is just wrong. So I was hyper focused on his behavior, on his communication, the things he was doing in his free time. And guess what? He was more loving to me. He was more benevolent. He was so kind, and I just kept thinking, okay, I cannot see. I mean, yes, I felt betrayed, but when I look back at it, he was protecting me from the pain and anguish he was going through. Sorry, I've got grandkids asking me questions. And so he was trying to protect me, and I can see that now, but then it was scary.
yeah, it probably felt like a little bit of a betrayal, like he had deconstructed all without you and didn't even consult you on something as important as your religious faith.
Very much so, yeah.
I know with the religion, part of the indoctrination that's so hard to get through is that we literally feel that we are good people because of our religion, that all of our morals and principles and values and all of these things are who we are because the religion infused us with them. And that is the biggest fallacy, because there are decent people, moral people, very loving, accepting, allowing, and principled people that are that way, not because of religion, because that's what they choose, and that feels more harmonic with them, and they want to live in a lifestyle that's true to their integrity. And so it really has nothing to do with the religion. So the idea that you said that, if he's going to leave the church, then that means all of his morals are going to fly out the window. He's probably going to cheat and have no remorse, because the only thing that's keeping him good is the fact that he's tightly wound in this religion.
Exactly. Yes. These are my fears. Again, not proud of them, because I know him better than that. So kind of crazy.
Well, and that's almost that point where the religion overrides your relationship, where, you're looking at this person, that he's a good person, he's a loving person, and that he loves you. But it's almost like the fear of the religion, that the fear the religion instilled in you overrides your ability to think rationally about how much he really just loves you.
And that's really where I came to wait a second. I mean, I'm really willing to give up my marriage without giving he's been studying this for years, 2 or 3 years by this point. I know this man. I have spent 28 years with him. He loved the scriptures. He loved the doctrine. And for him to do this and really come to it on his own, and for years to study it, and for me to just go, nope. Yeah, that was when I realized, okay, giving this the benefit of the doubt. And it doesn't take very long once you open yourself up. I mean, when you talk about a broken heart, and the ability to, when your heart is broken and it's open, it breaks, it's open. I was in a position to really listen, hear, but I did have to do it on my own. If my husband would have pushed that on me, I don't know where we'd be right now, honestly. So that has to be, give your spouse the space to make their own decisions, to do their own studying without your extra pushing.
Yeah, that's a key point, because even in the indoctrination, we've been constantly repeated over and over to us that the devil is so subtle, and that he's trying to tempt us and destroy our life. And then sometimes now we don't even trust our own partner, because he's been influenced by the devil. How else would he fall away from the church? Yeah, so now you're like, well, my spouse has been possessed, and I can't trust him. And so then when he starts pushing things onto you, then you feel like you've got to push back harder.
Yeah, this was what he saw a lot from me. Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
Good insight. So tell me a little bit about the what is it that you can talk about? What is it? How do you go about talking about it in a way that's productive?
Exactly. So I would say when you're going through this, the things you want to discuss are the things that bring you together. Things like, what can we do for each other? How can we still take care of each other's needs in the best possible way? I mean, there's so many things, you guys, outside of religion, outside of Mormonism, that still have your marriage, you know, that you can, what are the fun things that we can do for fun together? What do we still enjoy? Oh my goodness, we still enjoy kayaking. So let's do that. We still enjoy spending time together. We still enjoy, there's so many things. How can we relax together? How can we, maybe there's a new hobby that we can start together, you know? So I like to focus on the things that we have in common, rather than the things that draw us apart. Now, at that point, we were still Christian. And so that was something, I mean, even though he didn't feel Mormonism, he was still Christian. And so was I, obviously. And so that was something that, I can really resonate with that. And so we still prayed, and our prayers felt a little different. He let me call on the kids. That was kind of cool.
Yeah. You suddenly got some authority.
Right.
Call on your children for prayer.
Yes, a little feminine in me kind of helped, but yeah. So those things that bring you together and reassuring, and he just kept reassuring me of his love for me, and that I sure needed it at that point. And boundaries too. So we're gonna go right there to boundaries. There are things you cannot discuss again when emotions are high, and there's some things you can't discuss at all. I'm going to just be honest with you until, you know, I would say the weakest link, which is the spouse that is feeling threatened in this. So it's usually the spouse that's still in the church, until they're comfortable with communicating the things that, you know, about the church, about specific doctrines or things like that. So boundaries are super, super important. And I have boundaries with my married kids and with my sons-in-laws, and I had a daughter-in-law also that was still in the church. Her and her husband are now both out together, but boundaries don't go just with partnership and spouses. They go with children, they go with marriages or extended marriages. This is information that's good for even friendships where your best friend is in the church and you're out now. So
give me an example of what would boundaries look like between you and your husband when you were talking about the sensitive things. Like, what are some of the boundaries that you established?
So some of the boundaries we established, so he was very much, okay, I'm going to just full disclosure here. We kind of went into the remnant movement for a little bit. And in the remnant movement, the Snufferites were very much into the word of wisdom and the Joseph Smith. And so, yeah, it's kind of confusing, guys, but he believed that beer was okay and coffee was okay to drink. And so he asked me, and I always knew when he was going to have alcohol. At that time he was attending meetings where they were having the wine for sacrament. And at first that freaked me out. Then he showed me the word of wisdom, and I was like, oh, okay, this is okay. But as long as he told me and communicated, for some reason it was okay with me. I know that seems kind of strange, but I needed to know where he was going to be, he was going to these worship, these gathering meetings. And I went to a few of them with him just to observe while I was still very much, I wouldn't say TBM at this time, but while I was questioning, so I needed to feel safe. I needed to know who he was spending his time with. I also would say, at the end of his meetings, like, I don't want to discuss that. And there was times when I was okay discussing it, times when I wasn't, and he respected that. And because he did, we survived this, right? So it's kind of hard. It's been 6 years, you guys. It's kind of hard to remember. But I do remember it was a lot like this. I can 100% tell you his little tidbits are not the things that got me to question. It was literally my own journey. And I'm so grateful that I had my own journey, because if you don't deconstruct yourself, you're constantly questioning. And so I'm grateful that he gave me the space to do that. But that's where having a committed relationship comes in.
Well, and to me, it reminds me of, gaining a testimony. You can't borrow somebody else's testimony. How many times were we taught that? The same
Mhm.
thing, you can't ride the coattails of somebody else's deconstruction, because
Exactly.
the way the church is operating in your world, in your life, and in every aspect of your life is different for every person. The reason that I left the church had to do with mind control. The reason my ex-husband left the church is because he saw some abuses, psychological abuses going on with my daughters and young women's. And so it caused him to start questioning. And so once he decided that he needed to leave, that he was no longer believing, he just pretty much put his middle finger to the church and blew it up and smoked and walked away like a
Wow.
boss. And he didn't need to go back, and he was done. And for me, it was like I had been unpacking the church for 10 years before my shelf finally collapsed. And then when it collapsed, I needed to know every aspect of why and how to articulate it and how to verbalize it. I think because for me, I feel called to help other people. And so I wanted to know all the details of it so that I could help other people navigate. Well, he didn't feel that responsibility, and that's perfectly fine. That was not his calling. Um, so for me, when I hear you talk about that, there in my own relationship, there were certain boundaries, and understanding that each person is going to deconstruct in their own way. The way that you are wired is different. It's more complex. Not everybody has seeped into the specific doctrines the way that you have, or even understood them the same. And so that's great advice. I love that reassuring you that he's here for you. Also finding the commonalities, and
Mhm.
I don't know, all of that is very helpful, I think. Let's talk a little bit about the why. Why is it important to be able to have these vulnerable conversations with your spouse?
Well, communication is key in any relationship. And honestly, I fault him a lot for waiting so long to communicate to me. It almost backfired on him. Well, it kind of did for a little bit, but we made it. But it's so critical. I mean, when you're this connected to someone, well, if you're not communicating, you're living a lie. You're not living in integrity, and it will start. I mean, it will bubble up, right? You have to communicate. You have to be able to feel safe to communicate, and because this is a huge deal. When you're a Mormon, this is your life. These are huge, huge things that if you can't communicate, and if you don't feel safe communicating both ways, I don't know that you have a relationship. I mean, it is so core to having a solid relationship. So communication, why we communicate, to be understood.
Yeah.
And that is literally like coming up for air when you're underwater. When you feel understood, it's life-changing. So he was able to understand where I was at. He had deep respect for where I was at. And actually I learned deep respect for what he had learned, and knew that he couldn't unsee what he had discovered. I'm grateful that he gave me the space to do my own discovery. And although I didn't communicate to him that I was doing that, he did give me that space. If you don't communicate with each other, you're going to find you will find people to, or your spouse will find other people to communicate to, where it becomes, we were kind of discussing this a little bit earlier before this call, that can become toxic. If your spouse is not willing to talk to you about the faith transition, the questions, the doubting, and all this kind of stuff, they will turn to someone else and form kind of trauma bonds, or just like-minded friends that they can communicate to. This is a huge deal. This is,
I mentioned there too that that's essential. You
yes,
need some support. You
yes,
need
yeah,
somebody that you can communicate. You need somebody that you feel safe to express these things with. And if it's not your spouse, then it's almost like in unintentionally, you're pushing them out to go find it somewhere else. Something that really needs to be communicated between you two. You've got to learn to gain the skills to have those awkward conversations. Otherwise, you lose the emotional intimacy. Would you agree?
Definitely. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we can go on and on about this. I want to keep this at a short kind of nugget so that we're keeping the most valuable information. And we want to discuss this a lot more: mixed faith marriages, mixed faith relationships. I want to just for sure say that lead everything with love. Communication needs to be led with love. If you're coming from the heart, you can't go wrong. And if you're receiving from the heart, you're going to be understood, or your message is going to be understood. And the reciprocant is going to be understood and feel safe and feel open. You guys, it is, I'm getting a glimpse of where I was at, and it was a fearful state, and it was scary, and I felt very alone. I considered going to talk to my leaders, my church leaders. Grateful that I kind of spent some time in prayer and meditation at that time, and knew that that wasn't the thing to do. And it wasn't until I really became comfortable with kind of listening to my inner voice and being comfortable with, I got to do this for me, nobody else. This is for me. This is important. It's worth looking into. And again, just going back to the love, the commonality that you have, the things that you got to remember, the joyful times, bring those up often, do those things often, do what you can to preserve that relationship if it's worth preserving. Yeah. We will talk about that in another video.
I wanted to bring up what I call the awkward sandwich, and those times where you're ready to communicate. And that is my awkward sandwich recipe, is where you affirm the person, which sounds like, you know what, honey, I want you to know before I say what I need to say, I love you, you're important to me, our relationship is important to me. Then you say the awkward thing, like I don't.
The uncomfortable thing.
Yeah, the uncomfortable thing that you need to say. And then sandwich it.
Sorry, you froze up on my screen, Wendi. I hope you're still there.
Oh, sorry. And then restate the affirmation, maybe in even a different way. Hopefully it's there. Is it?
So you froze up.
Is that better?
Yes.
So then you say the thing, or so you say the awkward thing, and then you reaffirm, maybe reaffirm in a different way. Thank you for listening to me. I know this wasn't easy for you to hear, and I appreciate you allowing me to express myself. So you sandwich it in between the awkward thing.
Yes.
So I found that helpful. I remember with my dad came to me when I was still in the church, and we were having a deep conversation. He told me that he thought that Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet. Evidently, he had bumped into some information. And I knew he was reluctant to tell me this, but he knew that I was also, a thinker, and that I loved the truth, and I valued that. And I loved that relationship with my dad and I. But when he told me, I think that Joseph Smith was a fallen prophet, the way that I responded let him know that I wasn't a safe person to come to. And still to this day, my dad has passed on. Still to this day, I wonder if I had just been an open, safe place for him, if he was looking for somebody to talk to and to share that with, because he knew at that time it wasn't going to be okay for him to talk about that with my mom. And so I think in retrospect, for me, I now understand what it means to be a safe person to talk about. Otherwise, you're going to be hit with something that you might not agree with, but hold space for that person to share what they need to share. But it's a terrifying thing when you see your dad, who is the patriarch of your family, and you see his testimony start to deconstruct. You're like, it's falling apart. And so it's not just in your marriage relationship. It's that how can I be a safe place for people to come and share things with when I am so tightly wound in the gospel, when the church is everything to me, in that moment, I noticed that the church was more important than my relationships. And that is misplacing indoctrination. And so I like that you mentioned that with, being that safe place. How do you wish you would have done it differently?
I have so many regrets, and that's the thing. I mean, and I recognize it's kind of like in the words of Stephen Covey. I think he had the church centric, you have, love centered, I guess. And I remember thinking, I am a church centered person, and I didn't want to be. I recognize that. Kind of lost my train of thought, but yes, I have so many regrets, which is why I am here and so passionate about opening up my experience. And I'm not polished, guys, obviously, but I want to share my experience and what I have learned to help other people hopefully navigate this a little easier, a little quicker. And you know what? Maybe navigating it means that your relationship will end, your marriage will end, and that's okay. Let's give ourselves permission for that. Right now, we're talking about saving those relationships. I can definitely tell you now, it's been 33 years that we've been married. Our relationship is more vibrant than ever because we have gone through this, because we have both evolved, because we have learned to give our relationship and each other the benefit of the doubt over systems, over organizations, over indoctrination. And there's no guarantees. I wrote a blog about this in my Starting Fresh thing. It's called Our First Second Marriage. If you want to read that, talks about kind of our transition out of the church and how, our marriage survived because we both evolved and gave each other space. But I no longer believe in marriage at all costs, death to you, till death do you part. I no longer believe in that unless it serves you both still.
Yeah.
So I'm glad. I'm very happy that we're still married, but I'm very happy for my really good friends like Wendi and many others that have understood that it was time to graduate from that relationship. So
yeah, that's it. For us, it was a little different. We actually had something compatible now. We could talk about our wound, our church wound, and we now had something to talk about, whereas before we just weren't really that compatible. And then after we started to communicate openly, say the hard things, have really difficult conversations that we should have had like 10, 15 years ago, it started to give us the context and the skill to be able to say the hard things. And when we finally said the hard things, we realized we're not really that compatible, and we've got this second life together, and the kids are going to be gone out of the house. Do we want to start second life together? And we both decided mutually that no, we want to go on. And we understood that the relationship that we had, raising 5 kids together for 30 years in the gospel, that cycle had ended, and that we learned everything we needed to learn, and we were able to part amicably. And I suggest the book Conscious Uncoupling. That was fabulous for us too, but it had the least amount of fallout. But I would have to say that nothing reveals the health of a marriage more than one, if they cheat, or two, if you have a faith transition. Everything is going to be exposed. You're going to see that you have a communication problem. You're going to see that you've been withholding real feelings for a very long time. It all is just like right there staring at you, and you realize, we're really not that healthy. And being able to either reconcile that or to mutually separate from it you're gaining a tremendous amount of skill. On the job training is what I call it.
exactly.
You learn it as you go, because nobody can teach it to you until you go through it. So it's a big leap. It's a big step, and it's painful. These relationships are very tender to us. And I think for the most part is because as we live within the Mormon paradigm, we knew what to expect.
Oh, it was all laid out for us.
Yeah, everything was familiar. We know what we do on Sundays. We know where we're headed once the kids graduate. We're going on a couple's mission. We have our life is planned out for us. And if we don't, whatever we don't know, the bishop will say, you know what, I'm calling you to this calling or that calling. But now you're kind of crossing a threshold where you're in unfamiliar territory. And, you know, forgive my idea that just came to mind, but in the temple, we see that Adam and Eve being cast out of the garden. That's kind of
where we all went.
We're just going into this unknown world, and you know, he wraps his arm around her and kind of walks into the wilderness. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Is like, this is unknown territory. We're not quite sure where we're going to end up, but together we can work through this. And I think one of the things I wanted to stress too is that if you don't gain the skills to start communicating with your spouse, then that separation, that chasm is already building. You have to, at some level, get the courage and the format or the platform or something to start having those awkward conversations. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. It has an expiration date. If you can't have those conversations, your marriage has an expiration date. That can be scary.
Absolutely. Well, we would love to chat about this all day long. So we will have continued videos on this very topic of mixed faith relationships, mixed faith partnership, mixed faith marriage, because it is very important and it's something that a lot of people need help navigating and have asked for.
Yeah. So in the next video, we were thinking about talking about how to communicate when you have children, when you're in a mixed faith marriage and you have children, choices to make regarding your children, and how that kind of can get to be tricky territory when, you know, one spouse has an agenda for their children and you're starting to see, I don't want them to think that, or that's not healthy in our relationship. And how do you have those conversations? So lots to talk about.
Lots and lots. Yes. We're here for it.
Yes. Marcy, thanks for your insight, for showing up. And what was the name of your company again?
Oh, it's not a company. I just started a blog called
I'm sorry.
Starting Fresh. It's FRESCHE, the name of my business. And it's a little bit about my entrepreneurial business, but also about my transition out of the church. So there are a few. I really haven't done a lot there, but it's where I'm kind of containing all my little stories. So
awesome.
Check it out if you want to.
Well, thank you. And she's an awesome member of our Empowered Former LDS group. And she also helps with the Thrive Arizona group.
Yep.
So very much involved in the ex-Mormon community and helping people navigate through this rough territory and finding solutions for healing and moving on.
Yep. Thanks for having me, Wendi.
Thank you.